And now it's on? Can you hear me now? All right. I'm Rebecca Otto, really happy to be here with you today. Thank you, Ed, Sammy, Larry, Dave, who's a very important person today with that zapper. So I've had the honor of serving as your state auditor now for almost 12 years. I've had to run and win statewide 12 times. 3 times, 12 years. Sorry about that. This is our second debate today. And I wanted to give you a little bit of background about me. Labor. So my mom was in the Musicians Union. So labor and collective bargaining is very meaningful for my family. My dad left when I was 6 and there was a family of 4 very small children. My mom had to figure out how to make it with the 4 of us. So being in a union was meaningful for our family, and it was still tough for her to keep food on our table, a roof over our head, and clothes on our back. But she did it, and so I know how meaningful that is. And she later got remarried to another musician in the Musicians Union. My husband's in the Writers Union. Our son looks like he's going to be in IATSE, so the theater, right, technical. And he's already made contact and he's getting his hours. I was in the Teachers Union, so I was a card-carrying member of the Teachers Union. I taught 7th grade life science in the Mounds View schools. Yeah, if you can teach 195 12 and 13-year-olds, you can do just about anything. And any of you that work around kids know that. So as we're in this environment right now, and I call it the politics of greed, where certain people want to see collective bargaining go away. They want to see government privatized. They want to see all kinds of things that are going to destroy our quality of life and equality of opportunity. And we believe in work. We value work in the state of Minnesota, and work should pay. And so as governor, I just want to assure you that anything to diminish any of our ability to collectively bargain is off the table for me. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paul Thiessen, state representative, represent Minneapolis in the legislature. I have for 15 years now. And it's been a great honor to work with Ed and all of you on making sure that we make progress on certain things and that we stop some really bad things from happening. And the first thing I just want to say to you is that my philosophy when I was leader of the House of the DFL in the House, as Speaker of the House, as a legislator, was to make sure we worked in partnership to make sure this stuff happened. And when anything came up and Ed needed to get in, or any of you needed to get in to see me, I had made the time and we figured out how to move forward. And that's the kind of partnership that I want to continue as the next governor of the state of Minnesota. I grew up in Bloomington. My folks were both public school teachers. My family's been in the state since the 1860s. And my dad grew up on a farm in southeastern Minnesota. My grandfather was a Union Railroad guy up in Duluth back many years ago. And so we've done, our family has these connections all across the state. And I think that that's an important thing to remember as we talk about how we move forward together, because many of you, I'm sure, have those same kind of family connections, those same connective tissues that connect us wherever we live in the state. And I want to be a governor that's going to bring people together to make sure that we can bring everybody in the state forward to achieve a lot of great things. What my campaign has fundamentally been about, what I've been talking about, and what I think we need as Democrats and as pro-labor people to talk about, is the economic security of families. There's just too many people that don't have the peace of mind when they go to bed at night, whether they're going to have health care, be able to see a doctor and nurse in the morning, whether their kids are going to get adequate child care, whether they're going to be able to afford get some post-secondary education, whether they're going to retire with security. I've served on the Pension Commission for years and been a fierce advocate in the legislature to make sure that we hold our public pensions up. The thing that bothers me most, and I think this summarizes a lot of what's going on in this country, is that when people come in and say, those folks shouldn't have that pension because I don't have it. It should be the opposite. We should lift everybody up, and everybody should have that kind of security, and we should make that true for every economic security issue there is. Thank you so much.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be here with you. I'm Tina Liebling, state representative from Rochester. I turned a red district to blue back in 2004, and I have kept it blue, being a bold progressive. I never pretended to be a moderate. I've always been a bold progressive. I'm the only one of the candidates up here who supported Bernie Sanders in the last election, and it's not because we're both Jewish or I liked his hairstyle. The reason I supported Bernie was because I thought he was speaking to the real issues in this country, the rigged economy. And you know what? That big sucking sound we all hear is still the 1% sucking the resources away from ordinary working folk in this country. And we have to stand up for that. So the reason I decided to run, I'm not somebody who had the grand ambition to run, but we needed somebody in the race who was going to be talking about those issues and talking about how we compromise with ourselves too soon. We have to fight for the things that we know are good for people. Single-payer health care, raising wages for working folks, strong unions, strong schools, a clean political system, getting big money out of our politics, all of those things. We have to fight for those things, compromising maybe at the end if we have to, but setting out a vision and fighting for it. So I consider myself a bold progressive. I've always fought for the things that I believed in, right from the get-go. I'm proud of the votes that I've taken because I've always voted to support the things that I value. That's why I'm running, and I hope you'll consider me. I'm probably the least known of the candidates up here, but I'm glad to be with you today and hope to give you more, let you learn more about me. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for believing that we can self-govern and make a difference. I'm Tim Walls. I'm a public school teacher from Mankato. Grew up in a small farming community, which my mom still lives on that piece of land. The day after I turned 17, my father, a Korean warrior veteran, took me down to join the Army, and I spent the next 24 years on active duty and National Guard, retiring as a rank of Command Sergeant Major. I never envisioned my life being in elected office. When it come time to stand up for working folks back in 2006, I said I would run. And I have to tell you, the things we ran on, this idea of being able to collectively bargain, the idea is that you have the backs of all workers, making sure that the strength in the workplace and the audacity of believing that if you get sick, you should have health care to be able to cover that. And what I know is you not only had the backs of workers, you had my family's back. In the summer of 2010, I too, like Ken Martin, remembers when those black trucks rolled into Mankato and we were doing the town halls. And there were 2,000 people there organized from all over the state to push back on the idea of the Affordable Care Act. And there were threats coming in, and it was the Teamsters who took the line and stood behind my family and separated them from that crowd, knowing that you were there. My time in Congress has been having your back, making that case. As your governor, what I understand is most important to us. In this last election, 43% of union households voted for President Trump. They voted against those things we know. You know why? We can't go to them and say that was their problem. We didn't make the case that we speak their language, that we're like them. I want to be the organizer-in-chief here in Minnesota and not make it talk about that we're fighting this retreating action. We're going to take this and organize new places. We're going to take this and get out in front of people to make the case that this is the lifestyle you should look for. Work hard, have a dignified wage, have a dignified retirement, and don't expect someone later to come after it. So I hope I can earn your support on this. We know we can win in every corner of Minnesota, and we know that your members out there, again, I say this is, we're losing some of them on this. We shouldn't lose them on the message, but it's our responsibility to make the case that we do stand with them. And just like you had my family's back, as your governor, I want to have your back. Thank you.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Coleman, and I guess I'm the former mayor of St. Paul. Just in case I didn't know that, I am no longer the mayor of St. Paul, but I am happy to be here. Last year I had 2 jobs. I was running the city and running for governor, and now I'm down to 1 job, which is nice, except for I picked the one that didn't pay, or the one that didn't have health insurance. But I am glad to be here with you today. In 3 weeks, something really important is going to happen. The Vikings are going to win the Super Bowl. That's Sunday. On Tuesday, the following Tuesday, precinct caucuses begin. And thousands and thousands of people across the state of Minnesota are going to gather to support and to elect the next governor of the state of Minnesota. Now, as Minnesotans, we understand that the Vikings can lose in the playoffs, and yet the state will go on. But I will guarantee you that if we lose this election in 2018, I am not positive that the state of Minnesota can go on, certainly not in the form that we have come to expect it. We need to have a governor who will stand up with working men and women across the state of Minnesota and fight like hell for economic security for all of your families. I've traveled across the state of Minnesota and people are angry. They're angry that they can't afford health insurance. They're angry that the average CEO makes 300 times what the average worker is. They're angry that the infrastructure in the state of Minnesota is falling apart. They're angry that they can't travel on a freeway without hitting a pothole or worrying about a bridge falling down. We need to invest in those things that have historically made Minnesota one of the greatest places to live in the entire country. I'm running because I want to restore the greatness of Minnesota and make it a national leader. a national leader on investment in infrastructure, a national leader on economic security, a national leader on support for our families and for our children. I know what the path is going forward. It is standing together with union brothers and sisters to make sure that all of you have what you need for your families to be secure. That's the role of the next governor. That's the fight I want to lead. I'd love to have your support as we go forward into 2018. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my brothers and sisters. My name is Erin Murphy. I'm a registered nurse and a teacher. I'm a mom and a state legislator, and I'm running for governor. And I'm running for governor because I believe in a kind of politics that improves people's lives. And when we use that together, we can build a bright future for the people of Minnesota, and I want to do that with you. My dad built cars for a living at the GM plant in Janesville, Wisconsin, and I remember as a young person that they went on strike after strike after strike, and I remember it because we drank powdered milk. I didn't like that very much. My mom made chicken, canned chicken, that she served over biscuits, which was delicious. And we had side pork from my uncle's farm. I didn't like that very much either. Every time we went on strike, we had that food. Every time they went on strike, they built their power and their earning capacity. And I learned as a young person the importance of solidarity, the importance of labor, and our ability to build a bright future together. I am a registered nurse. I chose nursing because I care a lot about people. That's the very same reason I'm involved in politics. I practiced nursing in the operating room as a transplant nurse, but then went to work for 14 years for the Minnesota Nurses Association. I was an organizer, a lobbyist, their executive director, and stood with working people and nurses all over the state of Minnesota fighting for our way of life. And I have done that work with you. I decided to run for office after I took care of my mom at the end of her life. She had to fight with the insurance companies to get the care she needed despite having good coverage, and it made me angry. I ran 11 years and got myself elected, and the Teamsters took a chance on me and endorsed me early. And it is one of the reasons that I got elected, and I will never, ever be able to thank you enough for that, because for 11 years now, I have seen our capacity to take on the toughest issues and succeed for the people of Minnesota. I want to do that with you. I have faith in us and our capacity to do it, and I want us to not just worry about how we're going to stop the bullshit that we're seeing in other places in this country, but to imagine together what we can build for ourselves and our families when we stick together. Thank you very much.
There you go, the 6 DFL candidates. I forgot to do a couple things. One, if you're a drive board member, please stand up. Drive board members. These are our drive board members that are part of the decision-making group that do a lot of the work too for our members. Also, executive board members. Larry's obviously the president. Do we have any other executive board members here? Mike DeBuck, Scott Gelhar. Mike DeBuck out of Local 289 and Scott Gelhar out of So, on to our first question, and I think it's pretty much a softball. I think this should be pretty easy for you guys. Taking into consideration our dilapidated transportation infrastructure, what would you propose to fund both infrastructure and public transit? Meaning gas tax, user tax, sales tax, statewide, or metro? Rebecca, I'm sorry. Paul, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, this is a great question. Thank you. So, this is one of these issues that you think about your parents and your grandparents, right? They stepped up in their generations to build this state. They made sure that they made the investments we need to make that make our living today, our prosperity today happen. My generation, our generation, isn't doing that. And that's the conversation we need to have with the people of Minnesota. So I strongly support a much broader investment in our transportation infrastructure. I support raising the gas tax. I think we need to do that in order to make the kind of investments we need to make in our roads and our bridges to make them safe, to make your jobs a lot easier, to make sure that people can get to work, can get to the hospital, can get to wherever they need to go. I also think we need to invest in transit. I think we have a need to have a different conversation about this, though. I have a good friend up in Long Prairie, Minnesota, named Alan Parrish. He's a farmer. And I was bragging to him a while ago that I was just about to get 200,000 miles on my Ford. And he kind of laughed at me and said, I got 500,000 miles on my car. But the reason he has those miles on his car is because he drives 3 times a day from Long Prairie to Little Falls and 3 times a day from Long Prairie to Alexandria, 3 times a week, to get people who need dialysis because it doesn't exist in Long Prairie. That's what transit is about. It's about getting people to where they need to go, and it's true every part of this state. The conversation we need to have about transportation is not just about the infrastructure we need to build, it's about how do we get people where they need to go. If we return the conversation to the human being, the people that are driving the trucks, to the people that are driving the ambulances, to the people that are getting to work, then we can have the conversation about what transit really means. So I strongly support a gas tax. I think we need to do that because it's a dedicated fund and we've done it for generations. But we also need to get general fund investment into our transit and dedicated money into our transit system so that we have a robust system there as well. And I'm done. Go ahead.
Going this way?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, you know, I don't think you're going to get any argument from me about the need for transportation. And I'm from Rochester, that's the area that I represent. You know, of course we need transit all over the state, just like we need roads and bridges. So I think all of us up here, I think we've all said at different times, we support raising the gas tax. I think it's important to have dedicated funding for transportation because obviously we have to plan things a long way out. And that's important. And that's important for doing it efficiently so that we can make sure that the resources are in place when we need them. So I think that however we do it, and I'm flexible on exactly how, but I think it should be a real priority of ours. Exactly as Paul said, our parents and grandparents built this system and handed it down to us, and we could do no less. I grew up in Minneapolis, and I left after college, and then I came back many years later. Our transportation system had barely moved. I mean, we were dependent on buses in Minneapolis when I was a kid, and there was very little else at that time. It's kind of like, what happened? We've got to keep doing this year after year after year. Not do it in fits and starts the way we have to do it. We've got Republicans running the legislature, and they just don't want to spend money on anything. In terms of metro versus rural, we just can't allow ourselves to be divided. You know, people in the metro area should not have to pay for their own and then also pay for the rest of the state. That's just not equitable. We need to all be in this together.
Jim Oberstdorf was always really fond of pointing out that in Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution that the founders started out talking about the post roads. They saw it as one of the most important things that they could deal with, understanding what transportation did for us and the job creation and economic well-being as well as safety. We've seen this again, like so many of the issues in this country, of people figuring out ways to divide us. Again, ludicrous that we would have a division between transit and highways. When there's places for highways, build highways. When transit is needed, build transit, and all of us benefit from that. It's more about making this case, and what the governor's job is to help be that lead, give that vision of telling people why it makes sense for people in southern Minnesota to support transit in the Twin Cities for the economic growth that it creates, and vice versa. Why building a $3.8 million bridge in Rock County that serves 15 families is not wasteful, because those 15 families feed 50,000, and that bridge had to be built for the specifications of moving that heavy equipment. Those are things that appeal to people regardless of this tribal ideology that's got into our politics. We need to be very clear with them where their tax dollars are going, and I agree with Paul and the others up here that gas tax is the most efficient way to do that. We can be creative and talk about other ways. Infrastructure bank. We should not kid ourselves on this and believe that the state of Minnesota can do it without the federal government alone, but there are things we can do to put in place, put the pressure on them, because again, Minnesota works and is so different than other cold agrarian states because we invested not only in the people, invested in education, we invested in a robust infrastructure. And we're going to have a conversation of multimodally, what that looks like in terms of not just passenger but cargo trains, and we've got issues on locks and dams on the Mississippi River. Those are partnerships with the federal government that can be led by building the political momentum to make sure this gets done and creating those good jobs that make it happen. So this is one that I would say, as your next governor, this is a top priority because it's one we can get a win on, and it's one that the Republicans can't turn away from this. And if they continue to do that, you need a governor who can reach out into those rural areas and make it painful for them to vote against things that make a difference, and that's what I intend to do.
I told the congressman if he agreed to sit down, I would sit down too, just because every time I stand up, I feel like my head's going to go through the ceiling, so I'm glad he agreed to do that. Look, folks, this is, I think, the real reason, if you want to know why the Republican candidates for governor haven't shown up at this forum, it's because they understand you're not stupid. that you don't believe their lies, that they tell you that they're going to support investment in infrastructure, investment in transit, investment in roads and bridges, and then not provide the resources that's necessary for us to get there. We need an all-in strategy on this. We need additional gas taxes across the state of Minnesota to be able to fund basic infrastructure improvements. We need local option sales tax. Duluth just passed a very significant plan that now needs approval from the legislature, that may not get it from the legislature, to fix basic streets, city streets, the potholes across the city of Duluth. The fact of the matter is we need all options on the table. But the Republicans don't want to do that. They don't want to invest in infrastructure. They don't want to invest in the things that are necessary for us to move commerce across the state of Minnesota, and we need to fight back against that. But it's not just about the state highways and the freeways. It's about making sure that those local roads also have funding. One of the things I did as mayor was I went across the state of Minnesota, formed a coalition with mayors and elected officials in every city, large and small, north, south, east, and west in Minnesota, to form what we called the 84% coalition. Because 84% of the cost of local roads come directly off the backs of property taxpayers in that community. That's unfair, because it may be true that you travel on a freeway to get to a city, but their last mile traveled is a local road, and those local roads need investment as well. But the Republicans don't get this. I talked to the head of the bonding committee trying to get the 3rd Street Bridge fixed, and he said, well, I look out from my apartment and it looks fine to me. I said, well, let me see your credentials. Are you a structural engineer now? The fact of the matter is we need to be honest about the cost of government. We need to be honest about the cost of infrastructure. We need to invest, and we need to do it now.
I don't have the same height liability as does the former mayor of St. Paul, so I'm going to stand up because it's important to me. You know, I think people get frustrated with politics when politics doesn't work for us, and transportation is probably one of the most clear examples of that. Over and over again, people will go to the electorate and say, we're going to fix transportation. And as a part of my job for the last 11 years, I've spent a lot of time on our roads and bridges all over the state of Minnesota. You know where the good stretches are. You know where we need to do work. You know that too because of the work that you do behind the wheel. It is no good to say to Minnesotans, we're going to fix this, and then go to the legislature and not do it. It undermines our faith, and we're not making progress on a fundamental issue for the people of Minnesota. So when I am elected as your governor, we're going to get it done, and I support a dedicated funding source for both transit and transportation across the state of Minnesota, including a gas tax if that's what we think is the best. It should be a user fee, and we should get that done. But let me say this about our politics. It is no good when people promise something and then don't get it done. And right now in this next election, we're going to hear a lot of Republicans saying, yeah, we got it done for you. There is not dedicated and reliable funding to transportation, so there is not a dedicated plan for transportation. And last, it's important to say that when you have the power to get something done, you got to take the risk and do it. You got to do it. And that's what we're going to do together. And when we succeed, we're going to make sure that we hold our seats in the Minnesota House of Representatives. We're going to work together to win that next election based on that success. Are you on with me with that? You good with that? All right.
All right, we got the microphone on. So what I've done is I held a listening tour around the state starting in January rather than a speaking tour. And I didn't ask for money. All I asked for my fellow Minnesotans was, what are your hopes and dreams for our future and your family, you know, and what are your concerns and struggles? And everyone always wanted to talk about the concerns and struggles first because that's what worries us. It keeps us up at night. We want to keep a roof over our head, food on our table, clothes on our back. We want to be able to provide for our health. So what I decided to do after listening to Republicans too, because they came to my listening sessions 2 hours at a time, anybody was invited, was developing an economic agenda. And that's what I'm doing. And it's called Renew Minnesota. That's my statewide comprehensive vision name. I've released 3 parts, one around our healthcare system, one around getting to the cutting edge of the clean energy economy, which we can create up to 250,000 good paying jobs, and that sounds good to me. And then also getting at raising the wage and making sure young people have a fighting chance, giving them some tuition-free college after high school so every kid knows they can get somewhere. So with my economic agenda, I have 2 more pieces coming. I will have something very specifically around this for you. What I do with my stuff is I actually put numbers behind it and tell you how I'm going to fund it, and that'll be coming really soon. But what I'll tell you is this, as state auditor, this has always been my thing. I was on the school board, I was in the legislature just for 1 term, and it was enough. You know, I really like being an executive, but long-term financial planning is a thing we must do. And when you talk about finances in an accessible way to Minnesotans, they tend to get it. And so what I started doing already around civil infrastructure, which I dreamt up and I got a $19,000 grant was to start mapping out our civil infrastructure and creating really simple maps anybody can look at. Where is it? How old is it? How much of it is there? And are there projects and how much do they cost? If I can empower all Minnesotans to understand what's out there, they're going to put pressure on their elected officials. That's what we got to do. So I'm going to create some sunlight, transparency, and we then need to make sure we're methodical about how we get this done. But if they've been circling in the legislature and we haven't gotten what we need to get done. So we need to have that, again, just that clear picture for folks. Thanks.
Thank you. Great answers. So we're going to switch to a shift actually to a question from one of our members. It's a 638 member that works at a First Student, and the topic is unemployment benefits. In 47 states, school bus workers who work for subcontractors can't file for unemployment over the summer break. This would help workers make ends meet during times when work is scarce. Minnesota is one of the 3 remaining states which do not allow workers to claim unemployment benefits. How do you feel about this? And we're going to start with Representative Liebling.
So, one of the things that I think we have to really think about, and one of the real reasons that I'm running, is that people can't make a living. I mean, I don't know what school bus drivers make, but I can pretty much stand here and surmise that it isn't a whole lot of money. And so, given that, I think it would be fair to allow them to collect unemployment over the 3 months. This is something I talk about quite a bit, that if you look at what's happened over a recent 40-year period, the productivity of Americans went up 72%. The average wage went up only 9%. And CEO salaries during that time period went up 950%. Now maybe that's total compensation, I don't know. But people are falling further and further behind. And people who drive buses work hard for their money. And so it seems fair to me that they should be able to get unemployment during that 3-month period.
The answer is yes, but this is a really great question about how we start to win back folks, especially in other parts of the country. I think it's a broader question than that. Because if this were asked of a Republican up here, they would make the case, go find another job, why should you get something for nothing, you're takers and all this. And they would change that narrative to get to people who haven't driven school buses, haven't been in that, and all of a sudden those people would be saying, yeah, why don't they just go do that or whatever, and then they dismiss it as that. We all know unemployment insurance is incredibly smart, not just to protect the individual as a safety net, but to protect the economy. It was unemployment insurance during the downturn that allowed companies to lay off half of their staff, letting them collect unemployment insurance, bring the other half back at another time, collect their unemployment. So when the recession ended, they retained all of that quality knowledge that was there. Because the worst thing, and Floyd Palmer runs the bus service in Mankato, Floyd Palmer, a staunch Republican, would be with us on this issue because his biggest challenge is keeping and retaining quality, safe bus drivers. And when you let them go out, yes, you know what they do? They go find other jobs and they don't come back to drive buses, and then they're scrambling, and businesses know that causes problems. So it's about the messaging to the people who make this make sense. This is an issue in the long run. We pay into unemployment insurance. We could make an economic case that by keeping those qualified drivers there, our children are safer, our communities have more money being spent in them, and we retain the quality of the workforce that's there, instead of spending money, because it costs Floyd money to go out and get somebody the CDL, the bus license, to do it all again when somebody new comes back in. So this is the thing about smart policy. They would push back, and I wish the Republicans would have come, because again, 43% of your members, we're failing. We are failing getting to them. This is a case where we could expand to them and to others. Your union, you may get this, but that vast majority of union members aren't out there and say, well, it makes no sense to pay unemployment insurance to bus drivers when they're not driving, unless you explain it in a way that it benefits them personally, their kids, their community. And I think that's the job of taking this labor message, these benefits, out to a broader audience.
Every time I get off the freeway here on County Road C in Cleveland, I'm reminded of the 3 years that I spent driving school bus, just directly across the freeway here. It was a great job. I enjoyed it. It paid well relative to the time. But it wasn't the easiest job in the world. It was hard. You got up early in the morning, you got out to a cold bus in the dark, and you went and you had to deal with all the challenges that those students were bringing onto the bus on a daily basis. And I think one of the challenges that we have in this country is to make work dignified. No matter where you work, no matter what you do, treat the profession that you choose as a profession. And people denigrate the work that you do. It's too easy to sit back and say, oh, you're just this or you're just that. If you're driving my children to school on a daily basis, I want you to know what you're doing. I want you to have the respect. I want you to have decent working conditions. And I want you to have what the benefits that you deserve, that you have earned. The fact of the matter is, the question was, how do I feel about the fact that you're not eligible for unemployment benefits? I feel horrible about that. It sucks. It's not the right way to go. This is another assault against us. The number one underlying issue in this country right now is the disparity between the wealthiest Americans and the rest of us. The wealthy keep on getting wealthier. The tax bill that the Republicans just passed in Congress is a disaster. It lines the pockets of millionaires and billionaires. The Republican legislature in the state of Minnesota passed a bill to give tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires and big tobacco. The fact of the matter is we need to stand together. And the only way we're going to do that is when union members not only have the ability to stand up and fight for decent wages, decent benefits, and decent pensions, but that we expand union membership in this community. And we're not going to do it by treating people that have paid into a unemployment fund and tell them that they can't get their resources or they can't get their money back. That's baloney, and we need to fight against that.
Thank you for raising the issue, and yes, I would love to work with that on you to make sure that the people who are driving the school bus are able to earn unemployment insurance when they're not working in the summertime. When I grew up in Janesville, Wisconsin, every so often the GM plant would shut down because they had to retool the line and everybody quit working. And Janesville was a company town. It was a rural, industrial, agriculture community. That community shut down when the plant shut down. And the people who worked there not only got unemployment insurance, they got some pay as well. They earned that, they bargained for that, they paid in for it, and it supported families and it supported the community, and it kept Janesville going. It was mutual. I think subcontracting is a way that employers relieve themselves of some of the obligations that they have to their employees. I don't think that's any good for us. I don't think it's good for families, our communities, or for Minnesota. So I'm very interested in working with you. I think it's very important that people who are doing the hard work of supporting their families have the means to do that, given the working conditions that they face. And this makes sense to me.
Can I just say something? I am a school bus driver.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep my answer simple. Yes, you should be able to collect unemployment during summer months, so thank you.
That's not a big thing. It doesn't matter what you say or how good you are. The lobbyists have beat this every time it goes.
Yeah, so it's working against those lobbyists.
It's out there, it doesn't matter what you say.
Right, exactly. And so I think we're at a place and a time in our history where we're dealing with the politics of greed, where those lobbyists seem to have a little bit more power than us. That's wrong. That's what I'm running against. I'm running to make sure we're focused on the common good. Government's always been there for the people, and it's supposed to be there for the people. It's not there to serve big industry's bottom line. It's there about improving our lives. And so I'm really good as state auditor as calling out and being a truth teller. We're going to be truth tellers. We're going to make sure that we get the information out across the state so that, because you know what? We know that when we empower voters with good information and tell them what's going on, you know what they do? They vote differently generally. Not all the time, but generally. The other thing too is I think sometimes there are some that like to raid the fund, so they probably want to keep a cap on it. But you know, this is just, it's 3 months, so that would be my answer. You're welcome.
I just want to say one more thing too. Did you know that 80% or more of all the school bus drivers in this state are retirees?
Oh wait, I still have time. Can I just tell you, my son went to Forest Lake Schools. He's graduated now, thank goodness, and he went to Hamlin, and he's done, thank goodness. It was neighbors of ours that were driving our buses, and he knew them. And, you know, it was Jim for a long time. But those drivers cared so much about the kids. My son was a squirrel as a little guy, and, you know, he could get in trouble, and so they gave him things to do to keep him busy. But you know what they did? They also, the kids knew that they cared about him, and that changed everything on that bus. So when you know so yes, so bless your heart for doing the work, and yes, we had retirees driving those buses.
Thank you. And I know we're not done yet here. It's if we can hold questions to the end and you can approach the candidates afterwards, we want to try to get in as many questions as possible. So if you could just kind of hold them to the end, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I've always supported it, and I support it today, and I will support it as governor. So that's the short answer on that. And sometimes politicians, and I'll probably go and do that right now, but tend to talk a lot about issues. But you know, sometimes you just need the straight answer, and that's the answer. And I've supported it for a long time. But thank you for raising this other issue about how things get done at the Capitol. You know, because I've been there for a long time, and was leader of the Democrats for 6 years, Speaker of the House for 2. And I've seen how those special interests can come in and change things at the end. Just last year, I had a piece of legislation that passed 200 votes yes to 1 vote no. It went behind closed doors in the end of the session negotiations, and guess what? It did not come back out again, even though 200 legislators voted for it and 1 voted against it. And it's because those special interests got behind there. So one of the things we absolutely need to do, and it sounds boring and it sounds silly, but we actually need some transparency in our government. We should have bills on our desk for 48 hours, for 24 or 48 hours, so you and we can actually know what we're voting on. We don't do that. We should have committee meetings that are open to the public instead of being behind closed doors. We don't do that. We should have bills that aren't like 500 pages long, but a bill that actually just votes on this issue. So they can't kind of bury killing the bill killing that idea in a big bill. But so people have to take a stand and be accountable to their constituents. The way we stand up to the special interests, the way we stand up to those lobbyists, is to bring stuff out in the open. Because if you have to defend your idea in public before the people of Minnesota who are reasonable, you're going to take a very different position than if you can sit behind closed doors and kind of cut those deals in the background. So one thing I have said is if I'm elected governor, even if I agree with a bill, if it doesn't follow these basic common sense principles about transparency and accountability, I'm going to veto that bill because we need leadership that's actually going to return power to the people of Minnesota instead of the special interests that dominate things at the Capitol.
Great. Thank you for the answers. So I do want to say that we actually have a bill now going through the House. It's the best number for a bill. House File 911. And it does have to do with school bus drivers. And it is literally a 2-word change, and bus drivers. It's bus drivers is all it would change. But you're absolutely right. Turnover rate is through the roof. And these employers have gotten to the point where they've actually went with us and testified in the Unemployment Advisory Board to move this to the next level. So we know we're going to get some hearings on this issue next session. So I'm going to turn it over to Sammy Gabriel. And Sammy Gabriel is the president of Local 320 also, which represents public employees.
Teamsters Local 320 has been in very heated negotiations for many, many months with the University of Minnesota, and things are only getting worse. Currently, we have 1,500 Teamsters. They're voting on whether or not to accept the offer that's on the table, or to reject it and to go on a strike in less than 2 weeks from now. As governor, what do you believe your role is in mediating labor disputes with major public institutions that receive state public tax dollars in Minnesota? And as a follow-up, there's the Board of Regents that are involved with the university. They're kind of the like Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain, and we don't get to have discussions with them. But would you support reforming the regent selection so the public and the governor has a say in that? Congressman.
I'll take the second part first. Yes, absolutely. We all know how people get to be regents. They either lose an election or retire, and then if it's a Republican governor, they appoint them to it so they have a job. And not because they have any expertise in it, not because they have any care in it, and that is simply wrong. And it would be funny if it wasn't so damn damaging on what happens. And many times we know we get these people that have the chip on their shoulder and they're ideologically opposed to the idea of standing up with that. I see the role of governor, and it is this, that you are mediating this, but it's to stand with working people of Minnesota, to make sure that the University of Minnesota function and is a great institution it is because the people are in there. And I believe that. I have the support of the interfaculty organization, but it's everyone who works there. I worked at a school understanding that the support staff that was around that high school teacher, everything mattered to them. So it's the role of the governor to bring that workforce together, to understand that that institution works for the people of Minnesota, but the people who are there. The idea of your contracts being held up, the idea of your contracts that are negotiated in good faith, that you sit at the table for, and then become a political football for an ideology because people who have no idea what that job is tend to hold those things up. So I think one of the things, and one of the biggest things that the governor can do is you do have the bully pulpit to make the case to the people of Minnesota the importance of these jobs, the fairness of these contracts, the negotiation. We are in contracts with public employees who they voted no on things because they had the audacity to ask for an increase in pay that kept them flat with inflation. They didn't get an increase, they stayed just where they were, and that's because people negotiated in good faith. So I think the role of governor is to make sure that that system is fair. The reforming of the regions is personal with me, because I've seen that. I think they do a disservice both to higher education, to the workforce who's in there, and to the state of Minnesota when it becomes that highly politicized. But getting that contract done, getting it done fairly, valuing those workers that are there, it's the governor's job, again, to sell that to the taxpayers of Minnesota that are paying for that contract, and we shouldn't forget that, but they're getting a damn good deal for it, and we should make sure they know that.
For 10 years, I was a public defender in Hennepin County, and I was an AFSCME member at the time and very active in my local, but right now, if I went back to that job, I actually would be a member of 320, I think, and represented by Teamsters, which I would proudly be if I go back there. Hopefully I have another job so I won't have to go back to that, but the fact of the matter is when I was a member of a public employee union, I could count on two things. First of all, that I had a decent wage and decent benefits, and second of all, that I'd have a decent retirement. And we are continuing to see an erosion of those basic benefits and those basic guarantees that we have come to count on. And we're asking our public employees to do amazing things, to educate our children, to defend people in the worst of situations, to prosecute people that are struggling, to do so many different things. And yet we say we value what you do, but then we don't respect it via the contract and the contract language. And so it's incumbent upon the governor to stand up and fight on behalf of fair negotiation, of decent wages, and of decent benefits. Some of that is behind the scenes. Some of that is sitting down before it becomes too public, before it gets to the point where it's a strike, and to say, look, we're going to settle this, we're going to sit down, we're going to figure out how we can get this thing done, we're going to make sure that people are treated fairly and have decent benefits and decent wages. But at some point, the governor has to stand up and take a stand, and to be there on the front lines. I think a lot of us were down in Albert Lee just recently, standing with SEIU as they were having an informational picket at the hospital down there, only to have the mail system lock them out. They wanted one day of an informational picket, and the mail system locked them out. But luckily, the Democrats up here stood with those employees and said, you know what, you deserve, if you're going to do the work that we're asking you to do, you deserve to be treated with respect. It's ultimately about dignity and respect and decent wages and benefits so that you can provide for your family. The governor has to be the leader and the champion for all working men and women across the state.
I remember when I ran for office the first time and knocked a door for somebody who lived on Summit Avenue. And the person came to the door and said, well, I've read about you, I've read about your bio. You seem really pro-union. How do I know that you are only going to stand with workers? How do I know that you won't once in a while think about the employers? And I said, my job is going to always be to stand with working people. And I've kept that commitment for 11 years. I've kept that commitment with you. And when there was an informational picket at the University of Minnesota in the run-up to this now vote on this contract, I stood with the workers. I went over to the University of Minnesota and stood with the workers, as I have done countless times as a state representative, using the voice that I have, the power that I have, and sharing it with working people, because that's important. I will be your partner when I'm elected to be the governor of the state of Minnesota, and I won't come in and mediate a contract unless I'm invited in. It is first and foremost the responsibility of the people who are negotiating that contract, the working people, the union, to get that done. And sometimes someone can weigh in too soon and upend that. I have faith in you and your ability. But when and if it is time, for my voice, then I will bring it for the working people. I will bring it to make sure that I'm talking about why it's important to support workers in fair contracts, and that we get good settlements. I'm worried about the vote that's being taken right now on that contract. I'm worried about the terms and what is happening in terms of dividing that union over at the University of Minnesota. And if they vote for it, we're going to have work to do to make sure that that union stays strong in solidarity together. I want to bring my voice to that too. I will work with you in partnership, not just striking out on my own, but in solidarity. Thank you.
Okay, so for region selection, I know the governor doesn't appoint them. It's through a joint conference with both legislative bodies, so that's one. Two, it's in our constitution. So the only thing I'm wondering about is if we reform it, do we have to do a constitutional amendment? That's the state auditor in me. But yes, this is a land grant institution and it's an extraordinarily important one, and I'm disappointed in the difficult negotiations that have happened. There should have been a fair offer provided. Because this is our institution, and so we take great pride in it, and so you have to treat your workers fairly. So I'm sorry that that's been happening. You know, really, as governor, you do have certain appointments you can make, and you have to make sure those folks understand collective bargaining and the importance of unions and treating people fairly. And I can tell you that in my office, Office of State Auditor, I love my staff. I talk very positively about my staff. We have some of the best people in the state in auditing. And you support your workers and you find out what they need, you help them grow professionally, you fight for them at the legislature, which I've done over and over, and if you have to, you go to the Supreme Court because the legislature attempted to privatize the office that belongs to the people, and I'll do that too. So, but anyway, happy to look at reform and have that conversation about what that looks like. If it's a constitutional amendment, then we do that. But this is a long-standing institution that we want to make sure also values the workers.
Well, a couple things. First, I don't think any public institution in the state of Minnesota, and if I'm governor, I'll do everything I can to make this the case, should be using public dollars to defeat or break unions. And that's part of what's going on right now. And so we need to take a much stronger stand against that. We also need to actually fund our university more so that they can have the resources to do some of this work, right? And actually provide the kind of resources we need. As for the regents, you know, I've gone through this 15 years. It is a legislative decision, the way it works. The governor makes some recommendations, but the legislature has so politicized this process that it's become pretty much absurd. And one thing that has been lost in that process is for years and years and years, for decades, there was a labor representative on the Board of Regents. That ended about a decade ago when the Republicans made a decision to kind of flip one of their people into there instead of the labor representative. That is one thing we need to work on together, to make sure we get someone who understands labor, who understands and will represent the workers at the university onto the Board of Regents. We should get back to that tradition in our state. And if we do that, then I think we can have a stronger conversation about what we can do in the state of Minnesota to make sure that all workers can do well.
So I also was kind of surprised to hear Tim say we all know the governor appoints the regents, because the governor does not appoint the regents. And it's a process that over my, now I'm in my 7th term in the legislature, and the process has kind of gone back and forth, and there's constant effort to reform it. And the bottom line is that it's a horribly political process, and the best way to make sure that we get good, strong people into the regents, holding those seats, good people who understand how to treat employees, is to make sure that Democrats are in charge of the House and Senate. You know, that's number one. I just wanted to let you know, I've also been a member of a union. I'm a criminal defense lawyer by profession, and I used to be a public defender in Chicago, and I was a very proud member of my AFSCME local there, and was on the executive committee of my local and on the bargaining committee, and we at one time came very close to striking. So I have some sense of what a really tough decision that is and what it means for people to walk off their jobs. So I do think that the governor absolutely has to stand for working people. I think the interests of the ordinary person, the working person in the state, have to be the only interests that matter. Now, you know, we don't have very direct control over the University of Minnesota. It's a land-grant institution. The governor can't tell them what to do, but we do have the purse strings. And the governor has a lot of influence and can, you know, when you say, you know, they always want things, they're always asking for stuff, and you've got to use the leverage and the power that you have for the things you need. But we should never be about the insiders and the special interests and the big shots. And, you know, going back to what our bus driver here was talking about, absolutely, we have to stand up to those forces. And the problem is sometimes we say we will and then we don't. We have to stand up to the insiders and the big shots on behalf of working people.
Great answers, thank you so much. So we're going to shift gears into a question with regards to pipeline and mining. So Teamsters are employed by many industries. Some happen to be in the mining and pipelines. These are great jobs with unbelievable pay and benefits. We believe that there is a responsible way to go forward with these projects that both respects a public engagement process and protects the environment. What is your position on Polymet, Keystone, and Enbridge projects?
Well, I'm glad I got such an easy question to start off with. Thanks for that, Ed. I appreciate that. This is a tough one to answer in just 2 minutes because these are complicated questions. But let me start from the standpoint of I'm an environmentalist. I love the boundary waters. I love Lake Superior. I love the headwaters of the Mississippi River. And I want to do everything I can to protect them. But I'm also a person who loves the environment and understands that the most important thing that we need to do right now is to deal with the issue of climate change. And if we want to have a carbon neutral economy in the next 30 to 40 years, we have to have copper, we have to have nickel, we have to have the minerals that are coming out of northern Minnesota. There are 5 tons of copper that are going into every windmill. There are up to 200 pounds of copper that are going into a hybrid vehicle. There's nickel that are going to the Tesla batteries. All of those things require the minerals that we're getting out of northern Minnesota or have the opportunity to get out of northern Minnesota. But we're getting them right now from places that have no environmental standards, that have no labor standards. And the fact of the matter is we need to lead the way. We need to demonstrate if and how we can do this safely and in a way that protects our environment and make sure that we are continuing to push forward to the highest standards and show other people how it can be done. And even on the pipelines, the fact of the matter is right now that oil is being transported via a pipeline that's over 50 years old that's leaking and contaminating our groundwater. Even though we have to get to a carbon neutral economy in the next 30 to 40 years, it's a transitional strategy. And for the next 30 to 40 years, the question is not if that oil is going to be transported, it's how it's going to be transported. I'd like it to be transported via the safest and latest and greatest technology instead of 50-year-old technology that's going to leak. But at the end of the day, if we get in a circular firing squad, people always say, well, how come people in northern Minnesota aren't voting for Democrats anymore? It's because we've lost our way. We can no longer, we have pitted environmentalists against workers, and we need to get together and say, how can we have a yes and, how can we work on behalf of everybody and protect the environment? That's the only way forward.
This is a question that people are talking about all over the state of Minnesota, no surprise. I like to begin by saying we're talking about our water, we're talking about our jobs, we're talking about our families, and we're talking about our future, and it's important. I think it is important to focus on the process, the law, and science, and those are the things that should guide us in the decisions around these issues. I will tell you, I don't like the route for that Enbridge pipeline, Line 3. I don't like its route. I think it's going to be a problem, and I'm worried about that for our future. I'm also worried about the capacity, and do we really need the capacity? But let's follow the process, the law, and let science guide us. I think Polymet's going to get their permit before this group of us stand for election in 2018. The last thing we have to do is financial assurances, and that's underway right now, and I think they're going to get their permit. They have followed the law and the process. I want to dig in on the science. Their proposal right now requires that water be held in a pond for 500 years. I don't think that is a good enough solution for us. The Natural Resources and Research Institute at the University of Minnesota Duluth, Applied Research, already have ideas on the bench and in the field to solve the problem of water and contamination, not just with regard to copper and nickel mining, but also when we think about agriculture and runoff. And we need to dig in and invest there to find better solutions, because across the state of Minnesota, people value our jobs. They value our water. And when we have those strong shared values, we can find the solutions that we need to. So I want to invest more in that research to find better solutions so we can continue to do the work that supports our families, whether it is mining, natural resources, agriculture, and healthcare, all places that can serve to impair our water unless we stay ahead of that.
One thing I know about governors around the country is the states that are heavy into fossil fuel production, they're trying to figure out how to reinvent themselves. You know, so technology changes, our fuels change, I was just with an engineer from a really big utility, and he did the last 30 years of like how we generate power and how that's changing, right? So as the technology improves and we move forward, we find cheaper alternatives, that means jobs are changing. Now I know the mining industry in their mining magazine within the last couple of months said, we're going to continue to move to automation and mechanization. They're going to use robots. So we have to understand, as a governor, you have to understand what that means to your people. What that means to our people is, what's the next generation of jobs for our people? We can't sit on our laurels either. So for mining, what I did, knowing all of this, was what is it that we can do that will use our workers, where they can unionize and be paid well and support a family. And I have a plan, and it's going to create up to 250,000 good-paying jobs. It's getting on the cutting edge of the clean energy economy. It's coming. The utilities are changing. Then the guy's like, so we've all had to change what we're doing. They said their biggest problem is people are using less power, and they got to replace aging infrastructure. So he was talking about the math of that. He's like, we need people using more electricity. Well, I got a plan for that too. It's a good plan though. So it's figuring out like, what are those things? What's the, how is work changing? As we move away from fossil fuels, and believe me, other governors are thinking the same thing, how do we make sure our people have those good jobs? My Minnesota Power Plan can create up to 250,000 good paying jobs. I will stand beside you to help organize those jobs and make sure they're union jobs. My plan requires Minnesota workers, Minnesota companies. Right now, there's outside companies coming in. This is for our people. This is for our future, and it's for economic opportunity. And the beginning, like a wage for a wind technician is 70 grand. It starts there, keeps going. So all I'm trying to do is make sure we have that next generation. But when it comes to our people and our resources, I'm always going to make sure we protect us first and not allow these big corporations to line their bottom line at the expense of our future, saddling us with large liabilities.
On PolyMet, I too think the permit's going to be issued, and the governor should not stand in the way of that permit if it's issued. It should go forward, but we should make sure that we enforce it as strongly as we can. We should make sure there's financial assurance, and we should make sure that as we move forward, we as Minnesotans are capturing some of that wealth. So it's not just going to Switzerland and Argentina, but we should do value added. We should tax it like we tax taconite so that those resources can stay and be reinvested in our community. On the pipeline, I've read the EIS. It looks like the route that is proposed is actually the safest route out there. My biggest concern is that it is going through tribal lands, and I think that we need to have negotiations between Enbridge and the tribes to make sure that they can work out a deal that works in everybody's best interest, and that seems to be the biggest sticking point right now about how we proceed on that. The last thing that I just want to say is that as Democrats, one of the things we do very poorly, and we need to do a better job of, is not talking about jobs the way we should. We denigrate certain kinds of work and we raise up other kinds of work. The fact of the matter is a job at either of these projects, but particularly at the mine, even if it's 25 years that mine's life is going to be going on, that's a job that you can get married, you can have kids, those kids can graduate from school, get their own job and have grandkids. It's a generational job, and we should not undermine, we should not denigrate, we shouldn't make that less of a job than other kinds of work. And as the next governor, I want to make sure that we're having that kind of a conversation.
So the way I see this, I gotta say straight out, I don't think that this copper nickel mining can be done safely. I just don't, not here, not in a water-rich environment. And people want to say, well, let's wait for the science. I'm waiting for the science that says it can be done safely, because this is all our water, and this is forever. And I am a person who tends to be a little skeptical of big multinational corporations that say, we'll do this and we'll do that and we'll promise you these jobs and we'll do this cleanup and we'll do these assurances. It usually doesn't work out that way. And that means that all of us as taxpayers, as citizens of this state, are left holding the bag. So I think we should be very, very skeptical of those promises. I'll look at the science, but I'd like somebody to really show that can be done safely, and I haven't seen it. It may be true that it'll be done before any of us gets to be governor, but I think that would be really too bad. The other thing is that I think Paul's exactly right, though, about the way we have to think about employment in the state, and the desire of people to have those jobs is absolutely understandable. We've got so many things we need to fix in this state, so many things we need to build, that we should build things that pull us forward into the future, not things that help us continue with old dirty fuels. You know, climate change is real, it's serious, it's an emergency. I don't think we should be, you know, looking backwards. I think we need to be looking forwards of what we're going to do in the future. We've got water infrastructure all over the state that needs repair. We've got roads, we've got bridges. We've got all kinds of things we can be fixing and building. I don't think we need to be looking to copper sulfide mining or oil facilities as the way forward.
July 13th of last year, the Mesabi Daily up in Virginia wrote a story on, I was up there talking about this. Right after I got in this race, I went immediately up to the Iron Range to talk to folks. And their editorial said, actions speak louder than words, and the congressman understands this. I'm the one up here who has voted on these things. I've talked about this. No one in this room, and those people working either in those mines or on that pipeline, care deeply about clean water. I represent the 9th largest agricultural district in America, the 2nd most Republican district in America with a Democrat sitting in it. I get the endorsements of the corn growers and the soybean growers, but I also get the Sierra Club. There are things that we can do here if we follow the science and put things into place, respecting the process that's there. As far as PolyMet goes, I voted for the land swap. It was negotiated in fairness under the Obama administration. It allowed the opportunity to trade a piece of land that was inaccessible to one that could be used by the public, and then we can let the science and the permitting process go forward, keeping the financial assurances in place. Paul's right about this. The idea is the biggest risk and the least economic gain is the extraction. More economic gain, less risk is the processing. The biggest economic gain, they're absolutely right, as Chris said, is if you drive a hybrid vehicle, you've got more copper in it than anybody else. Don't come here and be disingenuous the same way with pipelines. We're going to have to do a transition. Climate change is real. We need to move away from those, but we need to now in the process make sure we're doing it as efficiently and as safely as possible. We have 2.4 million miles of pipeline in this country. I voted for the Keystone Pipeline after it was approved. I voted against it when they tried to short circuit all of the safety pieces. Once those were put in place as partners, we can get it done. Enbridge is the same way, bringing the tribes together. It's exactly what we're doing. There's no secret that my running mate is a Native American woman. We came out immediately and said, if it negatively impacts indigenous people, we need to go back and get them on board. How about hiring these folks? How about having them be part of the process? Make them become Teamsters. Let's do this thing right, but let's start getting back. And again, I'm glad to hear this, and the folks up here get this. When someone says it's just a job, teaching is more than just how I pay my bills. Teaching is who I am. When people extract minerals from the earth to build this nation, there's a pride that goes with that. Or building pipelines. We can do both if we set our minds to it. As governor, I'll do exactly that.
Thank you, everyone. That's a tough question to answer in a short 2-minute time, so I appreciate your answers. We have another question from one of our members who works at Three Rivers Park District. He's a local 320 member, and it's a question about minimum wage. With income and wealth inequality at an all-time high, how will you support raising the minimum wage to a livable wage throughout the state, keeping in mind that some cities have started the movement already with 15 now? Representative Murphy.
Thank you. I was the majority leader when we raised the minimum wage. I was the majority leader when Governor Dayton and the Democrats held the majority in both bodies, and we moved a very progressive agenda for the people of Minnesota, including raising the minimum wage. It took us 2 years. That surprised me a little bit, the 2 years that it took, because Democrats held that whole territory. But we did it. We did it with an inflator, and we've moved in the right direction. But as soon as we finished that, next came the claim for $15. And I understand why, because 9.5 is not a living wage for working people. Minneapolis has taken the lead, and I think St. Paul is going to follow. But when I talked to the mayor in Duluth, she said, I'm going to need help with this because we're an island up here. I don't think we can do it up here by ourselves. And just like when we did Freedom to Breathe, and that came out of local governments' efforts and local communities' efforts to change that law, so will we do this with the minimum wage. I support a $15 minimum wage. I think it's important when I think about caregivers, personal care attendants, and just working for a living and supporting your family. It's starting at the local level. It'll soon become a state issue. It's something I support, and I will sign it into law as the governor.
So, on my website, RebeccaOtto.com, if you do that kind of stuff, I actually have a developed plan on my website around raising the wage. We've got to raise the wage because in Minnesota, we value work. And if you're willing to work 40 hours a week, you should be able to come close to be able to support yourself. So I've got a plan to go $15 an hour, phased in over 5 years. That's just the beginning. That's not a livable wage. But we have to start somewhere. And I've been selling this around the state already because we need to get it done. I had one guy push back and say, well, that's crazy. And I said, really? that's crazy that work shouldn't pay. And I said, what, should we start paying people a basic income for not working? You know, because there's some states looking at that right now, because again, there's states that don't know how they're going to create that next generation of good paying jobs. I contend we need to make sure we have that next generation of good paying jobs, and we say we care about our people, we value our people, and we want you to come close to being able to make a living when you work 40 hours a week. The other thing too is you think about kids in schools and outcomes of kids in schools. I talk to way too many parents that are working 3 and 4 jobs across the state. They don't get to be home with their kids at the end of the day. They don't get to be there at mealtime. They don't get to be there to help them with homework. So I said to people, the reason why you got to pay people more is that's going to help the kids and their outcomes when they're in school. That actually improves outcomes when you can be home for them. So at the end of the day, we value work, and I've been willing to put that out there for people to see, and I'm not afraid to run on it.
Well, I support increasing the minimum wage as well. I was part of those tough negotiations that actually got the last minimum wage increase in the state of Minnesota passed. And it did take too long, but we were able to get it done, and done in the right way with the inflator. This issue always comes, the thing that I always think about when I hear about this is a friend of mine out of western Minnesota, a farmer named Tim Velde. And he came up to me a couple of years ago, before the minimum wage passed, and he said, we absolutely have to do this. Because if we don't raise the minimum wage, that waitress that's serving me at the local diner is actually subsidizing my lifestyle, and I don't need that subsidy. I'm willing to pay a little bit more so that person can also have a living wage. And I think that's how we need to talk about this, because we're all in this together. So I support a $15 minimum wage or whatever we need to make it livable, and I will fight for that and work with all of you to make sure that happens. But we can't also just stop there. Because a minimum wage isn't going to do it. We need to raise everybody's wages. And the very best way that we can do that is to make sure that we have strong unions in this state. There's no question that when you have strong unions, wages are higher in the state. We know that. We have to fight back against right to work, because when you have right to work, you know that the wages drop. We need to have prevailing wage and enforce that and keep that very strong. So the fact of the matter is we need to focus beyond just a discussion of the minimum wage to all wages. I was proud when I was speaker that we passed the biggest expansion of collective bargaining rights in a couple generations in the state of Minnesota for people that really needed it, for home care workers, for people that do the work of caring for your mom and dad when they get sick, or people with disabilities. We need to do more of that. As your next governor, I'm going to be out there fighting on minimum wage. I'm going to be out there fighting to raise all wages because at the end of the day, that's our best program going forward.
So one of the very reasons that I decided to run for this office is because too often we compromise against ourselves before we fight for the things we really need. And the state of Minnesota puts out some really good reports about cost of living. And what does it cost just to have a basic needs budget, just your very basic needs? You know, and a typical family right now in Minnesota, 2 parents and a child that are working total 60 hours a week in this report, right now $15 an hour does not even get you a basic needs budget in much of our state. So what I would say is we not only need to decide, you know, what the wage really needs to be, and then we need to fight for that. Like, fight for it now, not in 5 years, not have a plan that says we're going to get there over 5 years. I call that compromising against ourselves before we even start. Now, do I think that we may end up compromising? Of course, I'm not a fool. I've been in the legislature. Maybe I am a fool because I've been there all this time. I don't know. But, you know, if we start out saying we can't do what people need now, what are we telling them? It's okay to not have a decent living wage now? I don't think so. So I think we really need to fight on this issue. And I think also it's absolutely true. We need sick leave. We need paid family leave. These are just things that a civilized country ought to be providing for everybody. And just to finish up, you know, I know a lot of people say, oh, well, the small businesses will struggle. We ought to focus on that. We do darn little for small businesses. We do a whole lot for big corporations. We should focus on helping those small businesses pay that wage. And that would inject incredible economic vitality into this entire state, because we know that when people have money to spend and they spend it, it helps everybody.
This really is about the dignity of work. We all know in this room the hardest job we've ever done paid us the least amount of money. And you've got a lot of folks that they've made this narrative that somehow people who aren't making a living wage are not working hard enough. We know they're working multiple jobs. So this idea of a decent living wage makes both moral sense, but we need to make the case that it's economic sense. The best thing we can do for an economy is spending money in the pockets of middle-class people. We know what they did by giving it back to the 1%. They're just going to buy back stock and sit on it, and it's not going to trickle down to any of us because we've waited for that for 40 damn years. It will not happen. So this is really important to everyone, and as you've heard these folks say, and they're absolutely right, it expands that economic base. The first vote I took in the Congress when I got there in 2007 was the first vote to expand the federal minimum wage in 10 years. Now, it was not much, and in fact, it was insulting in my opinion. So at that time, and this is not a pat on the back, it's about how we need leadership in this. I said every single penny that I get in raise that goes in my time in Congress, I will pay back to the Treasury. And I've given about $90,000. But every time I do it, it lets me think about the folks who are out there busting their butt, making less than a living wage. I've co-sponsored the federal $15 minimum wage, but more importantly, I've worked with employers to talk about this. We've got a lot of leverage right now. In Minnesota, and specifically in southern Minnesota, we've got unemployment rates at 2% or lower. The leverage is in the hand of the workers. Now is the time to organize. Now is the time to use our leverage and say, you need workers? That's fine. We'll get them for you. We'll have them trained. They'll do great for you, but you're going to pay them a living wage. We need to use some of these things and not deny that markets are powerful forces. We know they manipulate markets, but we can use our market power at the same time too to ensure those are continuing to go up. So as governor, I certainly would sign that into that, but I think as your governor, I would certainly be at that signing ceremony with some of our biggest employers, with our small employers who are there proudly standing there and saying, I'm going to pay a living wage to get and keep the best possible employees we can have and continue to make sure they're living in our communities and spending that money there. These are economics is on our side, the moral argument's on our side. We should make it happen.
Well, don't tell anybody, but the former mayor of St. Paul proudly carries a Three Rivers Park season pass, multiple years. And the reason I bring that up, other than the fact that it was a question from a Three Rivers Park employee, is the fact that, I'll get to the minimum wage issue in a second, but when we invest in things like our park system, when we have that quality of amenities in this community, that's the way that we're going to continue to drive the future of the state of Minnesota. You know, the Republicans, again, who are not here, continue to tell us, well, why are you investing in these things? Why are you spending so much money on your parks? Why are you spending so much money on these bike trails and all these other things? And it's because it's a quality of life that we have in the state of Minnesota. It's not because it's 8 degrees in the morning when you wake up and try to start your car. It's because we've invested in those basic things that make a great place to raise your family, to live, to work, to play, and to start a business. But the fact of the matter is we need to make sure that it's a great place to work and live for everyone. $15 an hour minimum wage should be just the beginning of the conversation. It should be a national minimum wage. The next best is a statewide minimum wage, and if it can't be done on the state level, then it has to be done on the local level, cities or counties. But that is the beginning of the conversation, because $15 an hour is not going to provide all the resources that you need for a family unless you're working 3 $15 an hour jobs. And I find too many families that are doing exactly that. We need good benefits. The market is going to dictate a lot of this. There's an employee shortage right now, and Target just announced that they're going to a $15 minimum wage for all their employees. If you went down to Pearson's Candy Factory right now, you could start on the line down there at $13.50 an hour, but you'd also get health care, you'd also get sick and vacation time, you'd also get money put into a 401k. Those are the kinds of generational wealth building things that we need to start looking at, and it starts with union membership. When we have unions that are representing our employees, we get those kind of benefits and we get real living wages, not just minimum wages.
Great, thank you for the answers. We're going to shift to a different subject. I think it's a subject that always gets probably the most media at the Capitol, at the legislature, and it's liquor. So liquor liquor and liquor issues are near and dear to many Teamsters, specifically in the liquor industry, right? While Minnesota has a burgeoning craft beer and micro distillery industry, we have deep concerns of the negative impact to both the regular beer industry, Budweiser, Coors, and Miller, and liquor stores across our state. Last legislative session, there was proposed legislation that would have allowed the craft brew industry to increase the maximum production of barrels of beer by over 10 times and still benefit from small craft brewers designation. These benefits include no state excise tax, and the ability to circumvent the three-tier system by self-distribution, which gives them a competitive edge against domestic beers and other competitors. This legislation would have also allowed the sale of any type size container to be sold on-site at a craft brew or a micro distillery, thus competing directly with liquor stores. What is your position on allowing the expansion and changing of these laws for craft breweries and micro distilleries? And just mind you, we have about 750 members in the liquor industry, warehousing, delivering, and in some municipal liquor stores. And we start with Rebecca.
Yeah, I know. Also, okay, another fun one to start with. So, as state auditor, we oversee all those municipal liquor stores, and I know kind of their condition and how they're doing, and if they're making a profit. They take great pride in what they do, and they attempt to return revenues back to the community as a municipal. I never got to vote on any of these bills, so I can just tell you, I don't have that perspective. I think what I'm hearing from you is that it cuts down on the work that your workers have if some of these changes happened or are happening. There were some changes at the federal level. Were you talking about that too? The tax bill, I think there's some stuff around the craft brewers. Anyway, so what I want you to do with me is make sure you're letting me know like the impact it's going to have on your members, because I didn't have a chance to vote on that, or but I understand there's changes coming. I know there's a lot of microbreweries all over this state, and I know that whole debate that they had around growlers and all that. I wasn't in the middle of it, but what I'd ask of you, for me as governor, is please. My door is always open, and Ed could always come through it, to make sure that I'm understanding what bills mean to the members and their, in their future. And if there's a way to transition from something, that would be good for me to know too. But this sounds like it's a game changer for a large number of members potentially. So that's my answer.
Well, I support the three-tier system, and I think Ed will attest that for many years we worked very hard together to preserve that system in place as much as we could, including holding our caucus together to avoid a number of issues that, including the Sunday sales was passed this last year. But we held people in place to make sure that didn't advance for many, many years because of the input that you all had and the concerns that you had about that moving forward. And so similar to what Rebecca just said, that's first of all my commitment to you, is that we're going to work together to make sure that we hold a coalition together that keeps your job strong and that protects the people that are doing that kind of work. Because at the end of the day, this is a battle about kind of the future of this country. And I also have to say, there's a lot of folks up here that keep talking about, how we're going to bring people together, how we're going to work, and have everybody sitting at the same table when we pass legislation. I will tell you, I've been there in the trenches for 15 years, including as leader for 6 years. I know that there's sometimes you can't bring people together, and you have to stand up and say you're wrong and you're right. And I've done that, and I've done that with you for a long time. And I'm going to continue to do that as the next governor. I don't know that you're going to get the big employers sitting there to raise the minimum wage, and I don't care. I'm not going to try to necessarily do that. What we need to do is actually get the minimum wage raised. So the happy talk is great. At the end of the day, what matters is if it actually gets stuff done. And at the heart of my gubernatorial campaign, the reason that I'm running is I believe that there's nothing that matters in politics. There's no measure of success in politics unless you actually get the shit done. That's what I've done in my legislative career. That's what I want to do as the next governor. And that's my pitch to you. If you think that's important, I'd ask for your support. If you don't think that's important, then you should vote for somebody else.
So I have not usually been in the middle of these kind of issues because I don't serve in any committee that would consider them, but I'm pretty sure that I was opposed to this proposal in the last session when it was explained to me, because I gotta tell you, the three-tier system, it's confusing, and most Minnesotans don't know a damn thing about it. And I certainly didn't when I came to the legislature, so I think we have some work to do there, actually. But what's really important to me is that good jobs, well-paying jobs, jobs that can support a family should not be replaced with low-paying jobs that don't support a family. So, to the degree that you're I don't think we can stop the march forward of all change. And, and I'm thinking about Sunday sales, that to me, I have to tell you, I supported Sunday sales from the get-go. That's something that I think needed to change. But we need to, when now we're in this territory where it's just not as clear as that, and I think that what we don't want to do is let companies come in and replace good jobs with just nothing, just for no reason. And so absolutely, I think we need to stand up and fight back against that. And I want to echo too what Paul just said about, you know, the idea that you could bring people together, that by force of your personality, you're going to be able to make people agree. You know, if I believed that, I wouldn't be running for office, because that's nice. We all wish we lived in that world where we could find the solution on things and work with the other side and so on. And on many things we can. But the world we're in is not that world. We're in a world where we have to actually stand up against the 1%ers who will take it all if we don't stop them. And we just saw that with the GOP tax bill that made millionaires and billionaires a lot richer at the expense of everybody else. So we have to stand up strong and not think we can make everybody happy.
Well, I stand with you on this. The three-tier system works. It keeps folks safe. It does the right thing. It lets us track it. I've always been with you on this issue. Last summer, the beer wholesalers held their statewide convention in New Ulm. I was their keynote speaker and received their award for fighting this. But I think the one thing we need to make a clear case on this isn't big business versus family business. Most of these folks and where your folks are working are family businesses, these distributors that are out there, that you've been able to organize and get people working in that. It's a system that allows for the fair wages and everything else, but also for a fair running of how we do this. So this is one of those things that, again, trust me on this, that room of beer wholesalers probably wouldn't identify themselves necessarily as Democrats, but I can be there and make the case for you that you got the best qualified people, you're paying a good living wage to organized labor folks who are in there, and that system works. And I think it's unfair to tilt the system away. We're all pro-business, but when I hear my Republican colleagues say this, they're usually speaking in the singular, one business on this. And we're all excited about the craft beer businesses getting out there, but there shouldn't be an unlevel playing field. And so when this federal bill was brought on this, and I believe it was Representative Paulson was one of the leads on it, I voted and fought against it, and we stopped that bill from going forward. So this does matter. It is about jobs. It is about fairness. It is about a system that works. And it is about being effective. I actually have high expectations of getting things done. There's some Mankato folks in here. When I moved to Mankato, I coached the football team there. They told me they were struggling. We were 0-27. That first year I said, well, I think we can do better here. We scored 2 points that all year. 2 years later, we won a state championship. This idea that you can't solve problems, we can solve problems. This idea you can bring people together. You don't have to compromise your values, but you do need to bring the players to the table, the people most impacted by this to the table. And this is one of those clear-cut issues. There's people trying to undermine a system that works. There's people trying to get an unfair advantage, and it will drive down wages, and it will get us into the very things we're fighting against if we allow the system to be undermined. So I stand with you on this. We'll continue to fight for it. It simply works, and that's what we should look for.
The great thing about being 0-27 is there really is only one direction that you can go. Only one direction in that situation. Look, this is an issue that I think we have to have a balanced approach on. I think, you know, leveling the playing field, making sure that we're not undermining your jobs, undermining the support for our family-owned liquor stores in the city of St. Paul. St. Paul's a brewing town. We grew up with Schmidt and with Hams for years. I always say the first word I learned how to spell was Schmidt because you could see the sign out of the back of our living room. And so, you know, these were incredibly important jobs. My cousins, my relatives, my neighbors worked at these breweries. And as those jobs went away, they left a big hole in the city of St. Paul. A lot of the vitality we're seeing right now in the city of St. Paul, though, is coming from the craft breweries. We have lots of them on West 7th Street and downtown, out on University Avenue, and so they are an important part of our economy. They are what folks like. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that I have a craft beer every once in a while. But the fact of the matter is that doesn't mean that we have to erode the support that you have for the jobs that you have and undercut the work that you're doing. I'm not a believer in a either or. This has got to be a yes and. We can't tell people they can't, that we're going to, shut down the craft beer industry because that's not what people want. But why does that have to be at the expense of your jobs and supporting our current businesses in the position that they are? So this has to be a level playing field and it has to be equal. I mean, we're seeing the same thing with a lot of the technologies. The issue, the taxi business was one of the most regulated businesses in any city in the country. And so Uber and Lyft came along and all of a sudden it just completely undercut the taxi industry and took a lot of jobs away from folks. And the issue, there was there was just a completely unlevel playing field for those businesses. We have to be fair, we have to be equal, we have to treat everybody the same. We can't have rules for one set of folks and rules for another set of folks that disadvantage people.
I like beer. I'm Irish. I think the debate that we had over a number of years on Sunday sales lays the groundwork for this. And that was a hard-fought issue. And I stuck with you the whole time, and with the small liquor stores in the community that I represent, because it mattered to them as well. Not just about how they ran their businesses, but about the way they live. And we have a set of rules in place. And when new entrants come into the marketplace and they want to change those rules to advantage themselves, we got to pay attention to that. And we will. So I will continue to work with you. The three-tier system is about protecting those interests and making sure that the big ones, like Anheuser-Busch, don't have all the say. We want to make sure that the liquor industry is working for people in Minnesota and for the workers. But one thing that I think we need to do better, us, labor, organized people, is to tell the story of why. Because there were a lot of people who didn't understand why I continued to vote against Sunday sales. And they thought it was because I was against beer, which I'm not. I like beer. And instead, I was worried about what it was going to do to Minnesota families and to the workplace for people who had been doing this work for a long time in the middle of a series of laws that have been in place for a long time. When you change them up for the convenience of people, and that's what we were talking about, we have to understand the ramifications. So we need to keep telling our story to the people of Minnesota. And I want to do that with you. Because a lot of people who wanted to buy beer on Sunday didn't understand what it was going to do to your livelihoods and to your work. That's where we have room to grow together as we continue this fight.
Great. Thank you for the answers. I know they're very complex issues. The three-tier system is very complex, and liquor issues and laws are very difficult. I can tell you the way we look at it, though, is that every time a bottle or a container is sold at a micro distillery or a craft brewery, should I say, we feel it's circumventing the three-tier system. In fact, liquor stores have lost anywhere from 10 to 20% of their beer business. Many of those are Teamster jobs, Budweiser, Miller, Coors, and so that definitely affects them. Mayor Coleman had mentioned Schmidt and Hams. No question, I mean, those are staples, and they were an institution for our region. But you couldn't buy Schmitz and Ham out the front door. And that's what's happening here with the craft brew industry. And that's the difference. So that's what concerns us. So we're going to shift to another question from our membership.
This will be the final question. It is something that not just one of you in the audience wrote us a question, but many of you wrote us a question, and that is about right to work. Labor is under attack like never before, as we all know. The Supreme Court will hear and decide on a case that will bring right to work to Minnesota public employees in the next few months. If Minnesota does not elect a governor that's Democratic this fall, Minnesota will be another Wisconsin and Iowa. What will you do to ensure labor stays strong here in Minnesota? We'll start with Representative Thiessen.
I'm going to stand up for this one. The question is exactly right. The attack that's going on against labor, the attack that's going on against working people in this country is part of an overarching strategy that's been in the works for 40, 50 years. And that's to keep the power in the hands of fewer and fewer people, economic and political power, and fewer people. We absolutely need to fight back against this. This Janus case is going to be a serious threat to public employees in particular. It's going to create a nationwide right to work. We can do stuff in the state of Minnesota, though, if in fact it passes, to make sure that the ability to organize public employees, the ability to keep them in the union, the ability to set up the rules so that their contributions can be withdrawn from their paycheck, continue to have that going on. We can do that if we have the right governor, and I want to be the governor that does that for you. But the most important thing that we need to do is to do what we did when the tax from right to work happened in 2011 and 2012, when the Republicans controlled the legislature. Thank God Governor Dayton was there. But we worked with all of you to come down to the Capitol to raise your voices up. The only way that we're going to win this is to organize, to organize, to organize. And you need a governor that's going to be standing there with you in partnership making sure that happens. That's what I did as leader of our DFL caucus, and we stood together unanimously to make sure that we fought back against those attacks on labor. And that was hard work for some of our members, but we got them there because it's that important. And that's what I want to do as your next governor. But the other thing that we need to do is we need to go out to the people of Minnesota and explain that why the work that you do matters. And more importantly, to explain to them if they care about an issue, if they care about vulnerable adults, if they care about their park system, if they care about making sure that people have access to health care and have access to great educations, the fiercest advocates that are out there are union public employees. They're the people that are actually doing the work. And the reason these attacks are coming is because they want to undermine not just those jobs, but they want to undermine those folks' ability to advocate for all Minnesotans. I'm going to go out there and do that with you. This is absurd, and we need to fight back.
So, I think we all know that cowardice is contagious, but so is courage. And so, yeah, we have to stand up against this onslaught in any way that we can. And one of the things we have to do is tell the story better. Unfortunately, the number of union members has just continued to shrink. And people, there's a mythology about what unions are about and union bosses. And, you know, we hear this all the time in the legislature. People don't understand that unions are actually democratic organizations as opposed to the corporations, which are not. So there's a sort of false equivalency drawn. Oh, corporation, well, the union has to have the same rules, you know, even though they're not at all the same. So we need to do a better job of telling our story. And as your governor, I will be fighting to tell that story. Of course, I would veto any anti-union legislation that came that took away your ability to organize, to fight to improve your wages and your conditions of work, and to help to expand and get more workers to be able to pull themselves up and have that for themselves as well. That's what we have to do in addition to raising the minimum wage and trying to, you know, fight for better standards for all workers. We need to help to improve the ability of unions to organize. So that's a really important factor. And as a governor, even if I don't have actual power to make something happen, I would be using my voice to advocate and explain to Minnesotans why unions are important and why it's important to them, even if they don't belong to a union.
Well, I am labor. My family is labor. My wife's family is labor. We understand the middle class is built on this. This is the fundamental existential threat to the American working class. The Janus case does represent something many of us have never seen. This is our time. Many of us have stood on the shoulders of giants in the labor movement for years. We benefited for it. This is a group that you're here. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but this is about now. This fight against Janus and this fight against right to work, it has started long ago. What I'm asking, I'm here today, I want to earn your endorsement. I want to earn it because we have shared values. I want to earn it because I want to knock doors side by side with you and take our case out there. But I don't come to you to expect me to do it. The way we do it is in the last 9 months, I've organized the largest gubernatorial campaign, raised the most amount of resources that have ever been done at this point in a campaign. I've got organizers in every corner of the state, all being paid a living wage and health care. We're taking this message out to our neighbors in places where people have given up on. We got a special election coming in Tony Cornish's district. I got 61% of the vote there before. I ran on pro-labor in those places where they pushed back. We have to take responsibility. If we're applying for a job here, we need to do our job. We need to put ourselves in the strongest position. We need to take the message to folks, and we need to make it politically unpalatable for anyone in the state house or the state senate to think that right to work for nothing, right to work for no dignity. Start using our language about this and the fairness of work. My pledge to you is, when I get your endorsement, it's to work side by side with you, but put together things. If we are going to do all these things, the one thing we control right now is our own campaigns. Show people the strength. Show people you can build these coalitions. Bring people in who are counterintuitive. Don't mock the idea that folks who might have voted for President Trump are coming over. Tens of thousands of them voted for President Trump and me. Not because I agree with that bastard, but because they know they believe in me. They believe we can get something done. So let's do it now. This fight has already started.
Boy, the language up here, I'll tell you.
In that case, it's okay.
See what happens when the president starts swearing, and then all of a sudden everybody's up here swearing. Look, you know, when I said earlier that that we can survive the Vikings not winning the Super Bowl, but we can't survive not winning this election in 2018, this is front and center for that. The fact of the matter is, we will be a right-to-work state. We will be a right-to-work for less state. The assault that the Janus case represents is an assault on all public employees. As a former AFSCME member, I take a personal affront to this. That's why I was on the phone yesterday. I was calling mayors from across the state of Minnesota, asking them if they would do what St. Paul did and to sign out an amicus brief opposing any restrictions or reduction of the authority of cities to make their own determination about how they want to work with their employees and the representation and the bargaining that we do with our employees. We need to stand up. We need to make sure that we explain to people what happens when they lose union representation. But make no mistake, this assault on unions, whether it's public employees or whether it's private sector employers, is just another way to try to line the pockets of millionaires and billionaires, to undermine the authority of all of us to just have basic decent working conditions, to have basic decent wages and basic decent retirement. When you lose union representation, all of those things go out the window. We lose those things that have always made the United States of America great, which is a functional working middle class. They want to create a two-tier. We talked about the three-tier system under the sales for liquor, but this is a two-tier system that the Republicans are trying to get us: the very rich and then the rest of us. And the rest of us can't survive these attacks. The only way we can fight this back is to have more and stronger union representation. The governor has to be the strongest and loudest voice on behalf of union membership in the state, and I will be that as your next governor.
This is a fight about our power and our ability to build our futures. When I think about Audrey Lodgton, who was the nurse who fought against the hospitals because she was being charged for the glass that was breaking when she was cleaning syringes that she used in the practice of nursing in that hospital back in the 1940s, she said no more. And that was the start of the Minnesota Nurses Association, the Union for Professional Nurses. When I think about Mark Fromke telling me what happened in Crookston, in the northwestern part of the state, when American Crystal Sugar locked up their workers, they broke that community because that community was made up of the workers who made it work. And when I think about what happened at Lakeville Motor Express, through wage theft, they shut down one place and they ripped away from people who had worked there for a long time, not only their dignity, but their health care and their way of life. We know that this is a fight about power, and the Koch brothers and others would love it. They would love it if Minnesota became a right-to-work state like we've seen in Wisconsin, where I have family members who are teachers and correctional officers, and instead of negotiating over wages, they're negotiating over a dress code. And what is that? That's bullshit, right? That's what that is. We have to stand together. We together have built the middle class. And if we want hard work to pay off, it is going to require not just a fight against right to work, not just a defeat of Janus, but to continue the work we did when Paul and I were in leadership in the House, expanding organizing rights, using novel ways, and talking about the power of standing together in solidarity. I'm not just going to use my bully pulpit, my people's pulpit to talk about it. I'm going to continue to stand with you as I always have on a picket line and a negotiating table, and using my voice to talk about the power of what we are able to accomplish together in union. Thank you.
So with Janus, which I know there's a lot of concern over, I'll tell you as governor, I'll do all that I can to make sure the dues can be taken out of paychecks at the state level, and require employers to do that. We're not going to have any annual certifications and all these things that work to make it harder for our unions, and so I'll do whatever I can in my power to protect whatever I can if it's not a good outcome. And right to work, for me, I'll just tell you, it's easy to say, it's a bright line. I will veto it. That's it. So that's a bright line for me. I will protect our very important ability to collectively bargain, and also protecting prevailing wage. I'll just tell you a quick story on that mining stuff. So PolyMet has not committed to using union miners. And if they don't use union miners, you know what that's going to do to the wages on the range? It's going to drive wages down. So I actually have a pretty deep understanding of the whole copper mining and PolyMet, because I've been very involved as a state auditor, because I don't want that multinational foreign corporation to get the goods and get out and leave us with a big mess that we have to pay to clean up, or to diminish the quality of life of our fellow Minnesotans. And along that line, you know, just I will be here for you to make sure we protect what makes us special and that we do have a strong middle class, because we are special and we value work and we cannot allow that to change.
Wow. Thank you so much. I mean, these questions, I know some of them are very difficult, but what a fabulous job. I mean, if everybody could stand up, give them a round of applause. You know, some of the questions, like the liquor stuff, you probably won't be asked in any other labor union situation. So, with that, we're gonna allow 2 minutes. I just spoke to the hotel. They're gonna allow us a little time over, and you know, we could probably stay here for probably a couple more hours easily with other questions. But in respect to your time and our members' time that want to get back and watch the football games, right? We're gonna allow for a 2-minute closing remark session, and we're going to start with Representative Liebling.
Okay, well, so thank you very much for being here today and spending part of your Saturday listening to us and for having us here. I appreciate the opportunity. You know, one thing that hasn't been discussed here at all today is healthcare. And healthcare, I think, is a huge economic issue for Minnesotans, whether you're employed or not, whether you are self-employed or have a large employer. Healthcare is a huge economic issue for people. It's also an issue of life and death, let's face it. So one of the things that I want to tell you is that I have always been a very strong supporter of single-payer healthcare. I think that's the direction that we need to go in the state, and it would be one of my big priorities as governor. This is something I've worked on for many years, and I would say that of all of us up here, I'm the one who's been the longest a supporter of single-payer healthcare. But it's not just what your ideas are. It's what you're willing to do to push those ideas forward. And as I said at the beginning, one of the big reasons that I am running is because, first of all, I think that in order to win, we have to be talking to people about what's going on in the economy. And we all know it's that big sucking sound. It's that 1%, or what some people refer to it as the billionaire class, that just want it all. So that there's less and less left for ordinary people to even have a decent life. That's affecting everyone, from families with young kids, to people who can't afford to go to college, to people who can't afford to support their family, and people who can't afford to retire with dignity. Everybody's feeling this and everybody's afraid. And healthcare is a huge part of this, but in order to move these things forward, you have to be willing to stand up and be bold and fight these big interests. And that's something that I think I'm kind of known for, and something that I will do. Not give in, not pretend that you can make, satisfy everybody, because on some of these things you can't. You have to know which side you're on. And I believe that the way we win is that we let Minnesotans know that we are with them, and that's why they should be with us. So if you want a bold progressive for your next governor, remember what TINA stands for, T-I-N-A. It stands for There Is No Alternative. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you for believing in your country. Thanks for the organizing. Thanks for giving of your time and expertise. Thanks for when you get your check, they take a little money out and it goes to campaigns. It makes a difference so that folks can get elected and further those causes. Ken Martin set the tone at the start of this. We as Democrats take labor for granted at our own peril. We lost many of our members, especially up on the range. I can guarantee you if the Republicans were here, they'd deliver a message that we're going to mine, we're going to do this, we're going to cut up the regulations, and we're going to create jobs. That's very appealing to people. They're not going to do it, just like much of what they say, but it's very appealing. They're appealing this way. And they also believe that we don't understand where they're at. I got to be honest with you, as your governor, I'll go have the conversations with them. What's a better trap gun, a Browning or a Beretta? And I refuse to have it just because I outshoot everybody in Congress 3 years in a row, that I don't give a damn about when children are shot. Just like your members who are responsible gun owners, there are solutions on this that says don't go about demonizing them. They want to find answers to that. And we as a party start to figure out little niches of how we do that. That gets us in trouble up there. Or acting like because they want to ride their quad, they don't care about the environment. They do. It's their drinking water too. Those are the type of messages where we bring back working class people to party. Those are the way we start to find solutions. Then we can talk about that pensions are promises and we will fight for them. Then we can push back because our neighbors will be with us on those sides. That's the things that we failed to do. So we go into elections, we come and we want your endorsement, we want to take your PAC money and knock on the doors, and we'll vote with you and we'll try and get that done. But it's hard to get it done if now that 20 years ago, the western half of Minnesota had 33 members of the House and Senate. We've got 3 today. We need to get that message out there, not act like there's something wrong with them on this. It's how they live their lives, and the economic values of the DFL party matter to all of them. As your governor, I'll take that message there. We'll not only win this election, we'll start to change the tone on this and make it so it's a state that we all want and know and love. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you all for having us here. It's great to have this conversation. Every fall I come into this very room early on a Saturday morning with union members from across the Twin Cities. And they're getting up early on a Saturday morning not to go to work for themselves, but to go to work on behalf of their community. They're plumbers, they're pipe fitters, they're people that go across the city to work in seniors' homes, to go out to people that have a low income, that don't have resources to fix their furnace. And they make sure that when the winter comes, those folks that are desperately in need of help have the resources that they need so their furnace just basically works throughout the course of the winter. The reason why I tell that story is because our union members don't just go to work in the morning and come home and forget it. They work on behalf of our children. They help coach our teams. They help make our communities better. They work on behalf of our seniors. They work on behalf of all that need our help. This isn't just about who's in it for themselves. I think union brothers and sisters understand more than anybody that we're in this together and that we have to stand together, we have to stand strong, we have to have our voices be heard, we have to lift up those voices, and we have to fight like hell. I feel like I have to swear too now. I feel like I should throw out an F-bomb here, but I'm not going to do that. But we need to stand up, and we need to be counted in this moment in history. Working men and women have never been more under assault than they are right now. The policies of the Republicans in Congress, the policies of the Oval Office, the policies of the Republicans in the state legislature are a direct, all-out assault on working men and women on behalf of the richest, the millionaires and the billionaires. And when we stand up with our progressive values, with DFL traditions, when we look people in the eye and we say, this is what we stand for, this is who we stand for, and this is what we're going to fight for, then we will win elections. We will take that progressive message across the state of Minnesota, and we will not be stopped as long as we stand together. I want to lead that battle with you. Thank you so much.
I'd love to earn your endorsement, and I'm a good bet. I'm running for governor because I believe in a kind of politics that improves people's lives, and I want to do that with you. I want to build our bright future, and that of course includes strong public schools for our kids and our communities all over the state of Minnesota, healthcare that we can count on, and that's not just a political promise, it's a statement of value for me as a registered nurse. And I want to make sure that we're focusing on the jobs and the infrastructure that build Minnesota's economy and support our families and our communities. I believe in a kind of politics that digs into the hard stuff. We got to take on our part in climate change and build that renewable energy economy of our future. Let's recognize that we have racial disparities here in the state of Minnesota, and we shouldn't stand for that. We want everybody who's living here to be able to participate fully in our economy and build their own future. We can do that. Across this country, the tools of our democracy, our ability to collectively bargain and organize, our access to the ballot box without the outsized voices of the Koch brothers spending money like fools in our elections, our right to peacefully protest that's guaranteed in the Constitution, the ability of local elected officials to set the policies for the people who sent them there. Those are all under attack. Those are our tools to build our bright future, and I want to protect them and strengthen them and work with you to build a future that we deserve here in the state of Minnesota. I'm married to somebody named Joe Faust. Joe started a painting company back in 1980 with a guy he went to high school with. Joe is ready to retire, but he can't. He can't retire because we had to borrow too much money when our kids were going to school during the Great Recession, and he's pissed off about that. And when I asked him why he's still angry, he said nobody on Wall Street paid a price for what they did to our economy, but we did. And he gratefully did not vote for Donald Trump, but he's like people who did. And let's remember, while a lot of people in greater Minnesota voted for Donald Trump, a lot of people in base Democratic districts didn't vote at all. And we need to stand up for an honest, progressive vision for the people of Minnesota. And when we do that and say that we will fight for you, people come our way, and that's how we win an election, and that is how we build our bright future. I'm Irish. I am a fighter. I will fight with you and for our future. Thank you very much for having me today.
So that whole election thing, the rural counties that went for Bernie Sanders big went for Trump big. It was an anti-establishment vote. So we got to understand what that was, and that's why I had my listening to her. I get it. I know what people's concerns and struggles are, and I know what they hope for as a state. I have worked to create an economic agenda, and I've had reporters say to me, is that a DFL agenda? I said, it's a Minnesota agenda. It's those things that keep us up at night. It gets at those, keeping roof over your head, food on your table, clothes on your back, and your health. I didn't go into the detail I have. I'm the only candidate that has fully developed plans with the numbers behind them. It's good stuff, and it's meaningful for all Minnesotans, and doesn't matter what party you are, doesn't matter what part of the state you live in. Now, I've been the state auditor now for almost 12 years, 3 terms. Had to run statewide. It's not a sexy job. I think it is, but you know, people don't always get it. But it's really important because we make sure we have good government, and you have to work with the numbers. And as governor, it's important to understand those numbers, to understand what it is we can get done and planning for the future. So I can tell you I'm planning for the future, and I'm going to make sure we keep planning for the future as the nature of work is changing, that we keep our eye on the prize and we're organizing for that. You know, when Tim Pawlenty ran for governor and I ran for state auditor, we didn't win the governor seat, but I won state auditor by the largest margin in 112 years statewide, and I know people around the state, I've worked with them. When Governor Dayton runs, I win more rural counties than him. I won 50% last time. I work with fire chiefs, firefighters, town supervisors. I know this state. And I've been in city halls, fire halls, gymnasiums, working with Minnesotans all over the state. They know me, they trust me, and what I would say is I have an exciting agenda. I would love to earn your support. And I'm optimistic because I had Republicans say, hey, you know, you're a little bit different. You've got an economic agenda. I have some trades guys who left our party who are thinking of coming back. I have young people who are excited. These are all numbers and making sure we win, and that's going to help people win in the legislature. And as I run on collective bargaining, I get candidates who do too, and we win. Thank you.
Well, thanks for spending so much time with us today. Earlier this week, I got the endorsement of the Boilermakers in the state of Minnesota. And the reason they said that they did it is because they have a tough situation that they're looking at. And for the last 6 years, there's only been one Democrat that's actually come and talked to them every year about what's going on, and it was me. And I think that's what we need in our next governor, someone that's actually going to do the below the radar work of sitting down with people and actually understanding. Everybody up here can give a great pitch about why they should be the next governor. And I'm going to do a little bit of that right now too, but we have to remember that we're electing a governor, and it's a governor that needs to go out and work with people, and that's what I want to do. I've stood with you on many, many issues, and we've worked very closely together in partnership, and I think that's important, and we understand that that's what the next governor needs to do. We have some tough fights ahead of us. I think results and records matter. This is a job interview that we're going through right now, and I think if you're going to be hiring someone, when you go out to hire someone or you're looking at a coworker, you're going to look at what their record is. You're going to look at what results they've delivered, and I don't think there's anybody in this race in a partisan state government particularly, but anybody in this race that's actually delivered for working people, for everyday Minnesotans, more than I have. Because that's what matters. You know, when you look at what I did as Speaker of the House and when we were the leader, we passed the most progressive, the most productive legislative session in many generations. We raised the minimum wage, equal pay for equal work for women, expanded union rights. We did all-day kindergarten, we froze college tuitions, we invested in early childhood education. We made sure that we did the right thing for the people of Minnesota. And not only that, when I was the minority leader, I stood toe-to-toe with the Republicans every day. Again, we can have all the happy talk in the world about trying to bring people together, but when those anti-labor people come at us, you need someone who is tested and who has been there and knows how to do the work to stand up to people. I can do that for you, and that's why I want to be your next governor. That's what this, at the end of the day, is about. We need to win this election, absolutely, but we also need to govern effectively together. That's what I offer you. Thank you so much.
On to our second half of the program. No. So, you know, I just want to say a few things in closing remarks. First of all, Thank you for the questions. We had 25 questions come forward, and we wish we would have been able to get to all of them, but I know we would have been here very late, and I know you guys wouldn't have wanted to wait that late either. So thank you for the questions. We wish we would have been able to ask more of them, but unfortunately, all we had time was for 7 questions. I apologize if your question didn't get asked. We did this today to hopefully engage our membership, some of our membership, activate some of our members, and understand what the important issues are for this next election. Also, for potential endorsement somewhere down the line. We believe with 62,000 active and retired members in the state of Minnesota, the Teamsters are a viable force that could dictate which direction this election goes. And with our involvement, our family involvement, and our friends' involvement, there's no question we're a force to be dealt with. Also, with that, none of this happens without the power of our Drive program. There's Drive cards back there. If you're not signed up on our Drive program, please do. We have both Minnesota Drive and National Drive cards back there. Also, we are planning for a lobby day. Actually, Local 320 has a lobby day on April 17th. We're going to expand it this year to all of the local unions, and we hope that as time gets closer, we're able to get that information out to you, to the work sites, and that we have one heck of a Labor Day at the Capitol this year on April 17th. Lastly, thank you for coming today. Thank you for giving up your time. But we'd like to get a picture once we're all done. And so if everybody can kind of come up, we're going to line up right here, get rid of this table. Hey, and thanks for the timer too. You did a great job.